Nina did not cry when it happened. She found that strange, later, not at the time, because at the time she could not locate anything at all, not even the ordinary shape of her own breath. She stood in the parking lot of a small restaurant on a cold November evening and watched his car ease out into the street and disappear around the corner, and she thought, with the particular clarity that sometimes arrived immediately after a shock, so that is what that feels like. She was 29 years old. She had a fourth-floor apartment, with yellow walls that she had chosen herself, the specific yellow of late afternoon light in October, because when she had signed the lease 2 years earlier, she had decided she was going to live inside that color, and not explain it to anyone. She had a job she was good at, a small collection of people she loved with sincerity and without performance, and a large orange cat named Butter who regarded her with the detached affection of someone who had weighed all available options and decided she was the most acceptable one. From the outside, and she knew this because people said it to her often enough that she had stopped being surprised by it, her life looked like a thing well made, organized, bright, full of good decisions. She worked as a graphic designer at a firm downtown, 5 people, strong clients, the kind of place where the work actually asks something of you. She had been there 4 years, and was trusted with the projects that mattered, which she knew not because anyone said so directly, but because those were always the ones that ended up on her desk. She had 3 close friends who knew her well enough to be honest with her and loved her enough to do it carefully. She had Butter, who was large and warm, and slept at the foot of her bed, and sometimes crossed the room expressly to sit on her feet, which she had decided was a form of love. Inside all of this she was careful. She had been careful for a while, since a relationship in her mid-20s that had taken 2 years and left her quieter, not broken but recalibrated, the way a compass recalibrates after being too near a magnet. She had learned from that time that she could not afford to want things at full volume, so she turned it down. Not off, never off, but down to a frequency she could carry without it pulling her sideways. She had been managing fine. She had been managing fine until Owen. She met him at Priya's birthday dinner on a Tuesday evening in late March. Priya was her oldest friend, generous and dramatic and warm, who planned her birthdays with the seriousness of someone who believed the day deserved its own proper ceremony. The dinner was at a restaurant with exposed brick and very good bread, a long table of 14 people, and Owen was sitting across from Nina and 2 seats to the left, which meant she became aware of him before she had spoken to him, in the way you became aware of certain presences. Not with announcement, not with any particular signal, but simply through a change in atmosphere, the way a room felt different when a window had been opened. He was 32. He worked in architecture. He was tall in the way that was not imposing, with dark eyes that gave their full attention to whatever they were pointed at, and a way of speaking that was unhurried, deliberate, as if he had privately decided that each sentence was worth taking seriously before it was said. He did not dominate the dinner table. He was not the person who filled every space, but Nina found, over the course of the evening, that she kept orienting toward him the way you oriented toward a window when the light coming through it was particularly good. Halfway through the main course he asked her, not what she did, but what she was working on. The distinction caught her. What you did was a category, a box, a label. What you were working on was something else. It was a door left open, an invitation to say something that was actually true. She had been asked the first question so many times at so many dinner tables that she had a version of the answer that came out smoothly and meant nothing. The second question did not have a smooth answer. She had to actually think. She told him about the project that had been taking up more space in her mind than was strictly justifiable given the fee. A full identity system for a new community arts organization, 3 people running it on very little money, trying to build something real in the neighborhood they lived in. She had been circling the core visual idea for weeks. It kept pulling at her, the sense of being very close to the right thing without quite reaching it. He leaned forward slightly as she talked. He rested his chin in one hand. He listened the way people rarely listened at dinner parties, which was as if the answer mattered, as if he was filing it somewhere rather than simply waiting for his own turn. When she finished, he said, "What does it feel like when you're close to it?" She looked at him. She had been asked about the brief, the client, the timeline, the deliverable. She had not been asked what it felt like from the inside. She said it felt like a word she could not quite retrieve. The shape of it was there, the weight of it, the specific feeling of the thing she was looking for, but the actual form kept sliding just past her reach. And the most difficult part was knowing it would arrive eventually, usually when she was doing something completely unrelated, and she would know it immediately when it did, because of the particular quality of recognition, a thing falling into place. He nodded. He said, "That is exactly what a good building feels like in the middle of the process. You can feel the logic of it before you can see the form." They talked for the next hour and 20 minutes without stopping for more than the time it took to eat a bite of food or top up a glass. At some point, Priya's partner sat down beside Nina and made a joke about the two of them having formed their own private dinner party inside the larger one, and they laughed and let the conversation open back up to include the table, but something had been established. Before the evening ended, Owen asked for her number. He said he would like to keep talking, and he said it simply, without embellishment, which was exactly the kind of directness that caught her off guard. She gave it to him. She told herself she was being sensible. She told herself it was probably nothing, that dinner party conversations felt more significant than they were, that the particular atmosphere of a good table and good food, and someone who listened made everything feel charged with more possibility than it contained. She drove home and fed Butter and did not think about Owen for the rest of the evening. She watched a program she was only half interested in, and went to bed at a reasonable hour, and told herself she was fine, and that she had been perfectly sensible, and that dinner party conversations never came to anything. She was not fine. She had not been sensible, and she was about to discover that this particular one was going to come to everything. He texted on the following Thursday morning. Not early, not too eager, but late enough in the morning that it did not feel calculated. It felt like he had been doing other things, and had thought of her, and sent the message when it arrived. The text was not a formality. It picked up the thread of what they had been talking about, asked if she had found the word she had been looking for on the project. She had, in fact. She had woken at 2 in the morning the previous Saturday with it fully formed, the core of the visual logic she had been hunting, and had gotten out of bed and sketched it in the notebook she kept on her nightstand for exactly this kind of interruption. She told him this. He replied, 2 in the morning is the right hour. The practical part of your brain is finally quiet enough to let the rest think. She read the message 3 times. She put her phone face down on her desk. She picked it up and read it one more time. They had lunch the following week at a Japanese place near his office with 8 tables and very good miso. She had been prepared, in the hours before, for the difficulty of a follow-up encounter, for the thing where the atmosphere of the first meeting did not survive the second, where something that had felt alive and particular in one context turned out to be the product of the context rather than of the people in it. That did not happen. The lunch was, if anything, easier than the dinner had been, because there was no performance of a dinner party around it, just 2 people at a small table in the middle of a Tuesday, and the conversation moved the way it had moved before, following whatever thread was most interesting, rather than whatever thread was most appropriate. He told her about the building he was currently designing, a mixed-use development in the east of the city, and the argument he was in with the developer about the ground-level public space. The developer wanted to minimize it. Owen would not. The ground level, he said, was where a building spoke to the city around it. You did not minimize that. You built it as generously as you could, and then you trusted people to show up in it. She thought about design the same way. You built the container generously, and you trusted the content to fill it. She said so. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately place, something between recognition and a quiet pleasure, the face of a person hearing a thing they already believed, stated by someone else for the first time. Yes, he said. Exactly. She drove back to her office afterward and sat at her desk for 4 minutes without working. There was something shifted in her chest, something small but specific, the way a door shifts when it has been pushed slightly open and not yet closed. She was aware of it, and she chose not to look at it directly. She opened her project file and went back to work. She did not tell anyone about the lunch for 3 weeks. She told herself this was because there was nothing to tell. 2 lunches did not constitute a story. She was not a person who made stories out of lunches. She told Lena eventually, which was not something she planned. It came out sideways one afternoon over coffee in the sandwich place near Nina's office, the kind of thing that arrived in your mouth before your mind had cleared it for release. She said, I have been spending time with someone. Lena set down her coffee cup. She had short dark hair and a face that communicated its conclusions without fanfare. Who? Owen, from Priya's birthday dinner. He is an architect. I remember him. A brief pause, and nothing. We just spend time together. Lena's face said what her mouth did not, which was that spending time together and nothing were not as compatible as Nina was presenting them. It might be a little like that, Nina said, before Lena could. Just be honest with yourself about what you want, Lena said. That is all. Nina said she would be. She entirely intended to. She did not manage to be, for approximately 4 more months. What happened instead was that she and Owen built something without naming it, in the gradual and particular way that the best things were sometimes built, without announcement, without blueprint, one small piece added to the next, until one day you looked at what was there and understood that it had become something real. They texted every day, or close to it. They had dinner on weeknight evenings. They walked on Sunday afternoons along the river path that ran through the center of the city. A 2-mile loop they did so regularly that Nina began to feel she knew every bench along it, every spot where the light hit the water at a particular angle in the late afternoon, every tree that looked one way in October and another way in December. She met his friends. He met hers. He cooked for her, occasionally, when she came to his apartment on an evening when neither of them had other plans, and she sat on the counter of his kitchen, handing him things from shelves he couldn't reach without moving, and they talked while the food cooked, and it was easy in a way that made her pay careful attention to the easiness, because she had learned that ease could be the most misleading thing in the world. There were moments when she was certain. A Thursday evening in August when she had called him because a client relationship she had been managing carefully for a year had broken down in a single afternoon, and he had said, "Come over," with no hesitation, and she had gone, and he had made dinner and listened to the whole story, and asked the right questions, and somewhere around 10 she had looked at him across his kitchen table and thought with absolute clarity, this is the person I want to be in a room with when things go wrong, and that was not nothing. That was in fact everything. But he was careful, in his way. She had learned the texture of his carefulness the way you learned the weather of a place, through exposure and close attention. He was warm. He was present. When she was with him, she had his complete and unhurried attention, and she had learned not to take that lightly, because most people did not give it. But he did not reach across distances. He did not speak about the future in any way that included her. He was generously, completely present in the moment they were in, and then the moment ended and he was careful. She told herself this was enough. She kept telling herself for months. In October, he said something that shifted the ground underneath her. They were on his couch after dinner, the television playing a documentary neither of them was watching, and he had been quiet all evening in a way that had a different quality from his usual quiet. His usual quiet was easy, a comfort, something she had come to value as its own form of companionship. This one had weight. She asked if he was all right. He said yes, and then after a pause he said, "Can I ask you something?" She said of course. He looked at her, and there was something in his face that she had not seen there before, something that looked almost like a thing he had been preparing to say for a while and was not sure of. "Do you ever think," he said slowly, placing each word with care, "that we have built something here that is hard to name?" The particular thing her heart did at that question was not subtle. She kept her voice level. "Yes," she said. "All the time." He nodded. He looked at the television. "I think about it too," he said. "I just do not always know what to do with the thinking." She waited. The air between them was very full. "I care about you," he said. "I want you to know that." She said she knew. She did know. That was not, and had never been, the question. He said nothing else. Neither did she. When she drove home later, she sat in the parking lot of her building for 12 minutes before going inside. Not thinking exactly, just being in the fact of what had been said and what had been left unsaid. She would understand later that it had been both a gift and a warning. 3 weeks after that, on a Wednesday evening in November, she told him. She had not intended to tell him that night. She had a version of it planned, a careful one, the right words in the right order, delivered at a moment she had control of. But she was in the middle of a completely ordinary story about butter and a glass of water and 4 in the morning, and he was laughing, and she looked at him laughing with his eyes on her face and thought, without any of the preparation she had intended, now. She stopped talking mid-sentence. He stopped laughing. He looked at her. He waited. She said, "I need to say something." And she said it. Not all of it, because there was too much of it, and she was not going to give him all of it at once. But enough. She said she felt more for him than she had been saying. She said it had been there for a while. She said she was telling him because not saying it any longer was starting to cost her more than the saying would. He listened. He always listened this way, completely, without interruption, and she watched his face receive the words and shift into a register she could not entirely read. Not surprise, not quite. Something more like recognition. The face of a person who had known something, but had not let themselves fully know it. He was quiet for a long moment. She held the silence. Her hands were still in her lap. She did not perform anything. Then he said her name. Then he said her name. And then he said it. He said it gently, with his eyes on hers, and his voice low and steady. And it was full of a warmth that made everything harder, because unkind words were easier to put down. You could set them outside yourself. Kind words had to be carried. "You deserve someone wonderful," he said. She heard every syllable separately. She understood immediately and completely. She was not naive, and she was not going to pretend she needed it explained. Those words meant, "You are worth being loved." They meant, "I am not going to be the one who loves you." They meant it with kindness, with genuine care, with every intention of leaving her intact. He was being honest. He was being as honest and as generous as he knew how to be. She said, very quietly, "I know." 2 words. She meant both of them completely. They left without finishing the wine. In the parking lot he hugged her, the way he always did, and she let herself be held for exactly as long as it lasted, and she felt the familiar warmth of him and thought, clearly and without self-pity, this is the last time this is a normal thing. He drove away. She stood on the asphalt in the cold and looked at the empty space where his car had been, the particular nothing that a car leaves behind when it goes. She did not cry. She drove home. She fed Butter. She brushed her teeth and got into bed and lay in the dark and listened to the building shift around her. And she thought, okay, so now I know. She had been wondering for 7 months. The wondering was finished. She woke at 4 in the morning with her face wet, which told her that the body had its own timeline and did not negotiate. She lay still and let it happen, one hand on Butter's back, and she looked at the ceiling and she breathed. In the morning she made coffee and stood at the window in the yellow-walled apartment and watched the November street below, and she thought very carefully about what she had and what she was going to do with the morning. She had her work, and she had her people, and she had this apartment, and this cat, and this life that was, she reminded herself with deliberate honesty, genuinely good. She had told the truth, and it had not been met the way she had hoped. That was a true thing. It was not the only true thing. She was going to be all right. She knew this in the same clear, non-negotiable way she knew the best of her own work when she saw it. Not today. Today she was not all right. Today was going to require simply getting through. But she was going to be. She drank the coffee. She went and got dressed. She had work in the morning, and she was going to go to it. And that was the first thing, and the first thing was enough. Lena called the next day at noon. She did not ask how Nina was. She said, "Come over tonight. I am making the pasta with the brown butter." She said it the way she always said things, as if it were a fact about the evening, already decided, which required only Nina's agreement to become real. Nina said okay. She took the bus across town rather than driving, because driving required a kind of attention she did not currently have available, and she sat at the back of the bus and watched the November city go past outside the window, the particular gray of it, the way the light held in the afternoons now with a kind of effort, like something that was being kept up through determination rather than ease. Lena's apartment was small and warm and smelled of garlic and the beginning of butter in a pan. Lena did not say anything about Owen when Nina came through the door. She handed her a glass of water and told her to sit down, and she went back to the stove, and the sounds of cooking were the first comfortable sounds Nina had heard in 24 hours. She sat at the kitchen table and watched Lena cook and felt something that was not happiness and was not sadness, but was something closer to being held still for a moment, which was what she needed. They ate. The pasta was very good. Nina ate all of it, which surprised her, because she had spent most of the day assuming she would not be able to eat, and her body had apparently decided otherwise, which was one of the small, reliable mercies of having a body. She told Lena the whole thing over the remains of dinner, not in a collapsed way, not with the performance of devastation, but in the careful, sequential way she told stories when she wanted to get the thing right and not leave anything out. The restaurant, the table, what she had said and what he had said, the parking lot, the drive home, the 4 in the morning. Lena listened without filling any of the gaps, which was a skill not everyone had, and which Nina valued highly. When she finished, Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you all right?" "I will be," Nina said. "I am not at the moment." That is an honest answer. I am trying to only say honest things for a while. The other kind takes too much energy right now. Lena nodded. She reached across the table and put her hand on Nina's for a brief moment, and then took it back, because they were not an elaborate comfort kind of friendship, and the brief moment was exactly sufficient. "He was kind about it," Lena said. "It was not quite a question." "He was very kind. That is almost the hardest part." Nina turned her empty glass in her hands. "If he had been cruel about it, I could have been angry, and anger is easier to hold. It has a shape. This does not have a shape yet." Lena understood this, which was one of the things Nina had always loved about her. She did not try to make things more or less than they were. She said, "It will find one. I know it will. You will get there." "I know that too." Nina said it and believed it, which was not the same as feeling it, but was already something. She went home on the bus again, late, the city quieter now, and she sat in the back and did not try to think about anything in particular, and let the motion of the bus be enough. In the days that followed, she was present in the way that mattered. She went to work, she answered messages, she fed Butter, she did the ordinary maintenance of a life, and she was less present in the way that she had expected. There were hours that were fine. There were moments that arrived without warning, and felt like stepping off a stair she had not seen, a brief falling sensation, and then she was back on solid ground and continuing. She told Priya on the Sunday following the restaurant, on the couch of Priya's apartment with a cup of tea going lukewarm in Nina's hands. Priya was the kind of friend who felt things on your behalf at full volume, who had a face that communicated every emotion she was having without any apparent effort to contain them. And when Nina finished talking, Priya's face had gone through approximately 4 distinct responses before settling on something that was soft and direct and entirely without judgment. "I am so sorry, Nina," she said. "I am genuinely sorry." "Do not be sorry for too long," Nina said. "I need you to also tell me it was worth doing." "It was worth doing," Priya said, without hesitation. "Even with the outcome being what it is? Especially then. You would have carried that for another year otherwise. Maybe longer. You know you would have." Nina thought about that. She thought about the carrying, the 7 months of it, the particular weight of something unasked, the way it had been sitting in her slightly off balance for all of that time, and she had not always been able to identify exactly what it was, just that something was heavy. "Yes," she said finally. "That is true." "You were brave," Priya said. Nina shook her head. "I was not brave. I was just more tired of not saying it than I was afraid of saying it." Priya looked at her. "That is what brave is," she said. Nina sat with that for a while. Her friend Dale found out a week later, not because she told him directly, but because he called to make plans for their usual Saturday coffee, and heard something in her voice that he recognized, the particular flatness that arrived in a person's tone when the surface was holding, but the underneath was not. He said, "Come over. Tonight. I am making soup." He did not ask why. He made a large pot of something with lentils and good bread, and she sat at his kitchen table, and they talked about other things. A film he had seen, a project she was in the early stages of, a piece of music he had been listening to obsessively, and she ate the soup and felt full and tired, and, underneath the tired, somewhere much further down, something that might eventually become okay. She told him on the third bowl. He listened without interrupting, which was Dale's way. He was the most comfortable silences of anyone she knew. He did not feel the need to fill them, and she loved him for it. When she finished, he said, "Do you want me to say anything helpful, or do you want me to just be here?" "Just be here," she said. He nodded. He went and made more tea. He sat back down. They stayed at the table for another hour and said almost nothing else, and it was exactly right. She gave herself the first week to simply be in it, without trying to manage it, or make it useful, or extract something from it. She had read enough, and lived enough, to know that the extracting came later, that there was a period before it that had to be moved through with a certain amount of honesty. She moved through it. She slept badly for 4 days and then normally, which she had expected. She ate erratically and then well, which she had also expected. She woke twice in the first week at 4 in the morning with her face wet, and both times she lay still and let it happen, and then went back to sleep. On the 5th day after the restaurant, she started working on the identity system for the arts organization again. She had not been able to touch it for those 5 days, not because the work was connected to Owen, it wasn't, not directly, but because the kind of thinking it required was the same part of her that had been doing something else, the deep, attentive part that could not be in 2 places at once. On the 5th day it came back online. She sat at her desk in the early morning. Butter settled on the windowsill, the city going pale outside, and she opened the project files and looked at where she had left off. She had been close. She had known she was close. She worked for 2 hours and found the thing she had been looking for. Not with effort, not with the particular grinding feeling of forcing something. It arrived the way ideas arrived when the right conditions were met, clearly and almost quietly, and she knew it immediately. She sat very still for a moment, and looked at what she had made and thought, yes, that is the one. She sent it to her art director that afternoon. Her art director wrote back 20 minutes later, "Nina, this is it. This is completely it." She closed her laptop and made fresh coffee and stood at the window and looked at the street, at the ordinary Monday afternoon of it, and felt a clean satisfaction that had nothing to do with anything except the work, the specific pleasure of a thing made right after the effort of making it. It was the purest kind of good feeling she knew, the one that did not require anything else to be true for it to be true. Owen texted her 4 days after the restaurant. "I hope you are okay. I care about you. That has not changed." She read it 3 times. She set her phone down on the kitchen counter and looked at it from a small distance, as if looking at it from a small distance would help her read it more accurately. She was not angry with him. She thought about whether she was, and found that she wasn't, not truly, not in the solid core of herself. He had been honest. She had asked, in so many words, for honesty, and he had given it to her. The honest answer was not the one she had hoped for, but the honest answer was the one she deserved, and she had known, somewhere underneath all of it, that honesty was the most she could ask for from a person. She wrote back, "I am okay, thank you." She meant both things. She was okay. Not well, not complete, but okay, in the way that mattered, the way that meant she was upright, and present, and continuing. And she was genuinely grateful to him for 7 months of a quality of attention and companionship she had not had before, and knew she might not find easily again. And the fact that it had not returned to her the way she had given it did not erase what it was. She knew this in her head before she felt it anywhere else, feeling it would take considerably longer. In the meantime, she worked. She had the arts project finished by mid-December, a full identity system that she was proud of, the word mark, the palette, the application across all the places it would live, a complete visual language for a small organization doing something real. She delivered it on a Tuesday morning, and the directors received it with a kind of careful joy, not theatrical but genuine. The joy of people who had not expected to receive something this good, and were not quite sure how to hold it. She walked back to her car and sat in it for a moment in the morning cold, and thought about what she had made and felt, cleanly and without distraction, good about it. She had things to go toward. She kept reminding herself of this, not as a consolation prize but as a true thing. She had work she was good at, and that asked something of her. She had people who loved her and showed up. She had an apartment she had made into a specific and personal place, and a cat who required her attention on a schedule that did not care about her emotional state, and there was something useful in that. in being required to get up and fill the bowl and stay in the present moment. In December, she began attending a pottery class on Thursday evenings. She had started it 2 months earlier, before Owen, before any of this, and she had been going inconsistently, canceling when work ran long or when she was tired. Now she went every week without fail, because it was something she had to show up to in person, with her hands, and the concentration it required was total. She could not think about anything else while she was at the wheel, which was either the point or the benefit, she was not yet sure which. She was terrible at it, consistently, earnestly, thoroughly terrible. Her first attempts had collapsed in on themselves at the center. The ones that did not collapse were lopsided, or too thin at the base, or thick and uneven around the rim. The instructor, a woman named Sue who had forearms like someone who had been working with clay for 30 years, because she had, watched Nina's disasters with a face that expressed neither encouragement nor discouragement, only attention. "You are fighting it," Sue told her one evening. "I know," Nina said. "What are you trying to make it do?" Nina looked at the misshapen thing in front of her. "I am trying to make it be what I want it to be." Sue made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "The clay does not care what you want. Your job is to understand what it is doing and work with that." Nina sat back from the wheel. She looked at the clay. She thought that was probably true of more things than clay. She went back the following Thursday, and the one after that. The work at the wheel was improving incrementally, which was the only way clay allowed you to improve, through accumulation of practice and a gradual refinement of touch, rather than any sudden leap in skill. She was still bad at it, but she was a different kind of bad, a bad that was beginning to have direction. She went to Dale's film nights on Friday evenings, which she had always done, and which she continued to do, and she laughed at the things that were funny, and sat with the things that were not, and drank 1 glass of wine, and drove home at a reasonable hour. She met Lena for lunch on Tuesdays. She went to Priya's when Priya had people over, and she was good company because she was genuinely there, and not somewhere else, which was something she had not entirely been for the 7 months before, always half her attention in the country of what might be. Now she was here, fully and uncomfortably and usefully here. Owen remained in her life at a small and honest distance. He texted occasionally. She replied. She was not ready yet to sit in a room with him, to see him in the specific and familiar way of actually being in the same space, and she was honest about that to herself, even when she did not say it out loud. She would be ready eventually. She was not going to force it. What she was doing instead was the harder and quieter work of understanding what she was carrying and learning to carry it, without letting it be the heaviest thing she had. She had loved someone exactly, without substitution, and the love had been real, even though it had not been returned in the same way, and she was learning to let that be what it was. Not a mistake, not a failure, not evidence of something broken in her, just a thing that had been felt, and that had not resolved the way she hoped, and was still a real thing for all of that. She kept the list. Lena, Priya, Dale, Butter, the apartment, the work she was good at. She said it to herself like something she was practicing, and then after a while she stopped needing to practice it, because it was simply true, simply present, simply what was actually there when she looked. That was enough. On most days, that was exactly enough. January came in quietly, the way January always did, without the ceremony that December demanded, or the tentative newness of February. Just the cold, hard fact of the first month of a year that had not yet proved itself. Nina painted one wall of her living room on the first Sunday of it, the wall directly opposite the window, a richer and darker yellow than the rest of the apartment, a color she had been looking at in paint samples for 8 months, and had kept putting off for no good reason, except that sometimes, the things you were most certain about were the ones you took the longest to commit to. She did it alone, on a Sunday afternoon, with music on and Butter watching from the couch with moderate concern, as if the paint roller were a development he had not been consulted on, and was reserving judgment about. She rolled the color on in long strokes, and it went on darker than it looked on the sample card, richer, the color of something with warmth in it, and when the wall was done she stood back and looked at it for a long time. It was right. It was completely right. She sent a photo to Priya, who sent back 7 words. "That is the best yellow I have ever seen." She sent it to Lena, who replied, "Good." Now paint the others. She went to bed that night feeling the most uncomplicated version of okay she had felt in weeks. Not repaired, not arrived at any conclusion, but simply at rest inside her own life, in the apartment she had made into something specific, and hers, on the first Sunday of a new year with a darker wall across from the window, and a cat at the foot of the bed. She told herself this was enough, and this time the telling was easy, because it was actually true. The Community Arts Organization launched their new identity in the second week of January. Nina went to the launch event on a Thursday evening, which meant missing pottery for the first time in 6 weeks, which she minded slightly in the way she minded anything that interrupted a routine she had come to rely on. The event was held in the art space itself, a converted warehouse with good bones and enormous windows, and when she arrived, the identity system she had built was everywhere. On the window vinyl, the printed materials stacked on the tables, the banner behind the small staging area where the directors would speak. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the marks she had made, the letter forms overlapping and creating negative space inside each other, the overlap making something new from the joining. She had made that. It was out in the world now, and it belonged to itself. Claire, the director of the organization, found her near the drinks table and said, "It looks even better in person than in the files." "It always does," Nina said, which was true. Something happened when you printed a visual identity at full scale, in the real environment it was made for, that a screen could not fully prepare you for. "We have been getting the most wonderful responses to it," Claire said, with the particular energy she always had, which was the energy of someone who believed entirely in what she was doing and had chosen to build her life around that belief. "People keep asking who did it. I keep pointing them to you." Nina said that was kind. She meant it. She stayed for an hour and drank 1 glass of good wine and talked to Claire and to the other 2 directors and to several people she did not know. And on the way home in the cold January dark, she thought about what she had made and felt a clean, uncomplicated satisfaction that asked nothing of her except to acknowledge it. The new project that had come in at the end of the previous year was a more complex commission than she had taken on in a while, a complete rebrand for a mid-size company that had been operating under the same visual identity for 15 years, a company that had grown and changed and needed its outside to match its inside. It was the kind of project that required her to think at a different scale, not just the visual system but the strategy underneath it, the story the company needed to tell about itself now versus the story it had been telling, and how to bridge the two without losing what was real about either. She was in love with it, in the way she was sometimes in love with a problem, which was the right reason to take on a problem. She had said yes partly because of the scale, and partly because saying yes to large demanding work was one of the better things she could do for herself right now, which was to put her attention somewhere that earned it and gave it back. She worked on it through January and into February, long hours that she did not resent, because the hours were going somewhere. She was deep in the strategy phase, building the framework before touching a single visual, which was the kind of invisible work that her art director understood, and some clients didn't. And she was grateful to be in a process that required this kind of honesty from her, this slowness of approach. Owen texted in mid-January. He said he was thinking of her, and hoped the new year had started well. She read it, and sat with it for a moment, feeling for what it was. It was not a pressure. It was not an attempt at something. It was what it said, a thought sent from one person to another with no agenda attached. She replied, "It has started well. How are you?" They texted for a while, easily, in the way they had always texted easily, and she felt the familiar warmth of him without the ache that had been underneath it for so long, and she thought, this is new. This is a different temperature. Not healed, she was not using that word, but different. The shape of what she was carrying had changed. Not lighter necessarily, but more her own, more under her direction. She mentioned to him that the arts organization launch had gone well, that the identity was out in the world. He said he would like to see it sometime. She said she would send him the link to the organization's new website when it went live. That was the extent of it. Simple and clean and warm and bounded. She could be in that. She was learning she could be in that. The pottery class on the following Thursday produced, for the first time in 2 months of trying, something that functioned. Not beautiful, Not even particularly interesting, but a cup that was recognizably a cup, with an even rim and a base that sat flat, and walls that, while not uniform, held together. She held it up and looked at it. She felt a disproportionate pleasure in it. Sue came to look over her shoulder. She studied the cup for a moment with the assessing face she brought to all assessments, which was neutral to the point of being unreadable. Better, she said. Better than what? Nina said. Better than nothing holding. A brief pause. That rim is still slightly uneven. I know. You can feel it while you are working, and you are choosing to ignore it. Nina considered this. Nout, how do you know I can feel it? Because you are moving faster in the last quarter. You are rushing away from the part that needs more attention. She sat with that for a moment. She turned the cup in her hands and looked at the slightly uneven rim, the way it thickened on one side and thinned on the other. She had felt it. She had moved on anyway, hoping it would sort itself out, or that she could get past it without having to go back. It had not sorted itself out. Things rarely did. Next week, Sue said. You slow down at the rim. Nina said she would. She went home on the bus with the cup wrapped in newspaper in her bag, and she put it on her desk when she got home, not in the kitchen where cups belonged, but on her desk where she could see it, because it was imperfect, and it held water, and it was the first thing she had made there that was both of those things at the same time. Lena came for dinner the following Saturday, and noticed the cup on the desk and picked it up and turned it in her hands. Is this from the class? Yes. It is a bit lopsided on one side. I know. Lena set it back down. She looked at it for another moment. It has a personality, she said finally. I like that it is not pretending to be more than it is. Nina thought that was probably the best thing anyone had said about anything she had made in a while. She told Lena, over dinner, about the text exchange with Owen. Lena listened without looking up from her plate. When Nina finished, Lena said, How did it feel? Okay, Nina said. It felt okay, which is different from how it would have felt 2 months ago. What would it have felt like 2 months ago? Nina thought about it. Like standing too close to something very warm, she said. Where the warmth is the problem as much as the cold was. Lena nodded. And now? Now it feels like being in the same room as it from a normal distance. Good, Lena said, not elaborating, because she did not elaborate, but with a quality of genuineness in the word that made it mean something. In February, Nina started a personal project she had been turning over in her mind for over a year. A series of illustrated prints about people in city spaces, specifically public interiors, lobbies, corridors, stairwells, the threshold areas of buildings where people arrived and left and moved through without treating as destinations. She had been carrying the idea since the previous winter, a kind of visual essay about the quality of attention people brought to ordinary spaces, and she had kept putting it off because she didn't have a client for it. No brief, no deliverable, just the thing itself and the need to make it. She stopped waiting for a reason to start, and started. The first print she sketched on a Saturday morning, with no particular plan. A woman in a wide lobby, looking up at a ceiling that was out of frame, her expression unreadable but fully concentrated, brought to bear completely on whatever she was seeing. The quality of attention in her face was the whole subject of the image. The architectural space around her was there to frame it, to say, this is the ordinary world, and she is in it completely. She worked on it for 3 hours, and had something that was rough but alive, the way first drafts were sometimes more alive than finished things, because the energy of finding had not yet been smoothed over. She showed it to no one and kept going. By the 3rd week of February, she had 3 images in various stages, each one a different person in a different interior, each one depicting the specific quality of a person who is entirely where they are. She had not planned it as a theme, but she recognized it when it emerged. Presence. The way people were sometimes entirely present in an ordinary moment, and how rarely that was captured as a subject rather than background. She thought about this a lot that month, about presence, what it felt like to have it, and what it had cost her not to have it for 7 months, to have been half her mind somewhere else for all of that time. She had been in her life, but not entirely in it, and she had not fully understood what she was losing until she was back. She was back now. She could feel the difference. The large project, the rebrand, moved into its visual phase in the third week of February, and she presented the first round of concepts to the client on a Friday morning, and sat in the meeting room and watched them look at what she had built, and felt the focused, directed attention that good client meetings required. And she was fully there for it, not managing herself from a distance, not performing presence. The clients responded well. They had questions, which were good questions, which meant they were engaging seriously. She answered them from the actual position of knowing the work, not from any defensive or performing place. And by the end of the meeting, they had a clear direction, and she had a clear path forward. She went back to her office and sat at her desk and drank the coffee that had gone cold during the meeting, and felt the simple satisfaction of a thing going as it should. She thought about work the way Sue thought about clay. You worked with what was there rather than against it, and when you did that, the work itself told you where it needed to go. She was getting better at that, in the work, and possibly in the rest of it too. Owen asked, in late February, if she might want to have coffee sometime. He asked it lightly, with no pressure in the asking, in the way that left her completely free to say whatever was true. She sat with the question for a day. She thought about the previous version of herself, the one who would have said yes before she was ready, because she did not want to close anything, and the version who would have said no because she was afraid of what she might feel when she was in the same room as him. She said yes. She said she was glad he asked. They met on a Saturday morning at a coffee shop that was not the one they had usually gone to, which she had chosen deliberately, a small place near her apartment that she did not associate with him, on neutral ground, and she got there first and ordered, and when he came in she watched him cross the room, and felt the familiar quality of him, his unhurried way of moving, his particular kind of presence, and she felt something. She did, but it was not what it had been. It was warm and real and manageable. She could be in it. He sat down. He asked how she was. She told him honestly. Good. Working on something big. The personal project going well. The pottery still very much a process. He talked about his work, the arts center in a neighboring city that was almost finished, that had given him more difficulty in the final stages than any building he had worked on in years. And she listened the way she always had, and she asked questions because she was genuinely interested in the answers. They stayed for an hour and a half. When she walked home afterward, she took the long route, along the river path, the February cold on her face, the water gray and flat and moving. She thought about what that had felt like, the morning, the coffee, being in the same space as him again. It had felt okay. It had felt, actually, close to fine. Not what it had been. Not the charged, uncertain, undeclared thing it had been. Something more modest and more real. Two people who had known each other well, sitting in a coffee shop, talking about their work, and it being simply that. She walked all the way around the river path without stopping, the full 2 miles, and when she got home, her face was cold, and her hands were cold, and she felt clear in a way that was not the clearness of absence, but the clearness of something settled. She made tea and sat on the couch, and Butter came and put his large orange weight in her lap, and she sat there for a while, just being in the afternoon, and thought about nothing in particular. She had loved him specifically, and that had not been met, and she had learned to hold that, and she had not become less than herself in the holding, and that was, she thought, perhaps the real measure of it, not whether the outcome had been what she hoped, but whether she had remained herself all the way through. She had. She was sure she had. She picked up the sketchbook from the side table and turned to the next blank page, and began to rough in the 4th illustration in the series, a man in a stairwell, looking up through the angles of the flights above him, with the expression of someone seeing something for the first time that had always been there. She worked until the light changed and the afternoon became evening, and then she made dinner, a proper meal, and ate it at the table, and the apartment was warm around her, the walls that particular yellow, and she thought, I am doing well. I am actually doing well. It was not the life she had been hoping for in November. It was the life she had, and she was in it. That was not a consolation. That was something better than a consolation. That was the actual thing. March came in mild and gray, the way March often did in this city, holding the temperature just at the uncertain edge between cold and not. the light returning gradually and without announcement, so that you noticed it only in comparison. A morning that was brighter than the last. An afternoon that lasted a small amount longer. The sky a higher shade of its usual color. Nina noticed it because she had always paid attention to light, professionally and privately, the way it changed the meaning of a space, and the mood of a day, and the way you moved through a room and a season. She woke on the first Saturday of March to the particular quality of morning light that arrived now, harder and cleaner than January's, coming in through the window at an angle that laid a bright stripe across the yellow wall, and she lay in bed and looked at it for a while before she got up. It had been almost 4 months since the restaurant. She thought about this without drama. In the observational way she now tried to think about time and distance, as data, as location, as information about where she was relative to where she had been. She was somewhere new. She could feel it. She got up and made coffee, and stood at the window with Butter beside her on the sill, both of them looking at the March street below, and she took the inventory she had been taking every morning since November, the private account of what she had and what she was going toward. It was shorter now than it had been in the early weeks, not because there was less in it, but because she no longer needed to say it all the way through, because most of it had stopped being a thing she needed to remind herself of, and had become simply a fact about her life that she carried without effort. She had her work, she had her people, she had her apartment, she had Thursday evenings at the pottery wheel, where she was still imperfect and still showing up. She had the personal illustration project that was now 5 prints deep and going somewhere real. She had herself. That one had taken the longest to put back on the list, not because she had lost herself. She had not. Not entirely. Not in the way that some people lost themselves to wanting someone, but because a certain amount of herself had been occupied for 7 months with something that had not resolved, and the reclamation of that occupied territory had been gradual and sometimes difficult, and was, she thought, very nearly complete. The large rebrand project was in its final stages. She had been working on it for 4 months, longer than most of her projects, and she was in the part of it that she liked least and considered most important, the testing and refinement, the systematic checking of every element against every application, the making sure that what looked right on screen looked right on the wall of a building, and on the corner of a small business card, and on the loading screen of an app. She had a checklist and she worked through it methodically and without impatience, because this was the work that made the difference between a visual system that held together and one that fell apart the first time it met the real world. Her art director stopped by her desk on a Wednesday afternoon and looked at the current state of the system spread across 3 screens and said, "This is your best work in years." Nina looked at the screens. She thought about whether she agreed. "It might be," she said. "It is. I can always tell. There is a quality in work you care about fully that is different from work you care about with most of yourself." She thought about that after he left. She thought about what it meant to give something the full measure of your care rather than most of it. She had been giving most of herself to things for a while, because the rest was occupied. Now she was available in a different way, and the work was showing it. She did not think this was the lesson she was supposed to take from any of it. She was resistant to the narrative that said the value of loss was in what it gave you, as if grief were a trade, as if the cost were justified by the credit. That was not how she experienced it. She had not needed to lose anything to learn how to work more fully. She had simply been in a particular situation, and now she was in a different one, and in the different one, the work was different too. Still, the work was very good. She could notice that without making a story of it. In the 3rd week of March, she went to an exhibition at the museum, painting, contemporary work she had been wanting to see for 2 months, and she went alone, which she had been doing more of lately, specifically choosing to go to things alone that she might have previously felt the pull to bring someone to, not as an act of self-discipline, as a practice of something she was getting better at, which was being fully in an experience without the mediation of another person's response to it. She walked through the exhibition slowly. There were perhaps 30 paintings, each one large, each one working with color in a way that rewarded close looking. She stood in front of several of them for longer than she usually permitted herself, past the point where most people moved on, until she had received what the painting had to give. She thought, in front of the 3rd painting, a large field of deep blue with a vertical structure rising through it, that might have been a column or a person or a beam of light, depending on where you stood, about Owen. Not with grief, not with the acute thing, but with something more like clear water. She thought about what he had given her in terms of attention, the particular way he had of looking at things, the specific grammar of how he saw, and she thought about how much of her way of looking was hers alone, and how much had been refined by spending time with someone who looked differently from her. She was grateful for that. She was, by March, genuinely and without complexity grateful for the 7 months, for what they had been and for what she had taken away from them. The gratitude sat cleanly beside the loss, rather than in competition with it, and she had not expected that to happen so soon, had not planned for it or worked toward it. It had simply arrived one morning, and she had recognized it and taken note. She finished the exhibition in 2 hours and walked out into the March afternoon and called Priya, not because she had anything particular to say, but because the afternoon was good and she wanted to share it. Priya answered on the second ring. How was it? The exhibition? Very good. One of them I would like to own and cannot afford. Which one? She described it. The vertical structure in the blue, the ambiguity of what it was, the way the color itself held an entire range of feeling without naming any of them. Priya listened and then said, "Send me a photo of the catalog page." "I will when I get home." A brief, comfortable pause. Then Priya said, "You sound good." "Do I?" "You sound like yourself. Fully yourself. I have not heard that in a while." Nina held the phone and walked down the museum steps into the March afternoon and thought about what Priya had said. "I think I am," she said. "Starting to be. Starting to be is enough." She went home. She sent Priya the catalog photo. She fed Butter and made tea and sat at the desk where the illustration project lived and looked at the 5 prints she had made so far, arranged in a loose sequence that was not yet their final order, and she thought about what was missing from them. She had been circling something that the 5 existing prints had approached from outside but not yet entered, a center she had been moving toward. She looked at the prints for a long time without touching anything. Then she saw it. The 6th print would complete the sequence, and she knew exactly what it was. Not a person moving through a space, not a person arriving or leaving, but a person standing still, in the middle of a space that was neither inside nor outside, in a threshold, and looking not toward a destination, but simply forward, with an expression that was not waiting, and was not hoping, and was not the absence of those things but something else, something more like being entirely here without needing it to be anywhere else. She picked up her pencil. She began roughing it in. She worked for 2 hours. When she finally sat back, the 6th image was there in sketch form, imperfect and right, and she thought, yes, that one. That is the last one. She had started the series before she had the idea. She had made 5 prints without knowing what the 6th one was. But the whole time she had been moving toward it, and now she was here. And she recognized it because she had gotten here too, in the place she was standing. Not at a destination, not in any particular story about arrival, but in the exact middle of the actual day, the actual March Thursday, the actual window, with the actual light coming in at that angle. She told Dale about the project over coffee on the following Saturday, showed him photographs of the prints on her phone, and he looked at them without saying anything for a long moment. "They look like you," he said finally. "In what way?" "They look like someone who pays very close attention and makes it look easy." She thought that was the most accurate description of what she was trying to do that anyone had given her, and she was glad it came from Dale, who did not give descriptions carelessly. "Thank you," she said. He handed the phone back. "Are you going to do anything with them? Gallery? Publication?" She had been thinking about this, the arts publication that had shown interest in earlier work, the organization whose identity she had built, whose walls might hold them well. She had not fully committed to either, because she was still not sure the series was finished, still not sure the 6th image was right, until she saw it completed. "When the 6th one is done," she said, "then I will know." She went home from the coffee with Dale, and worked on the 6th print for 3 hours, and finished it. Not in the way that some things were finished through exhaustion and relief, but in the clean, decisive way that meant the thing was complete, was exactly what it needed to be, and could not be improved by more working. She printed a proof on her home printer, which was not the proper way to see it, but close enough. She held it up. The figure in the threshold, the light from the left, the expression on the face that was not waiting and not hoping and was simply here. She put it on the wall beside the others and stood back. There they were, all 6. A sequence that had taken her 5 months to make, not continuously but in accumulation, a thing she had been building in the margins of everything else she had been going through. And now it was here, and it was done, and it was, she thought, the truest work she had made in years. She thought about Owen. Not the loss of him, but the presence of him in all of it. The way the year had moved and where she had ended up. And she felt the clean water feeling again. And she was grateful, simply and without residue, for the 7 months, and for what she had been able to make on the other side of them. She texted the arts publication the following morning. She said she had a series of 6 prints she thought they might be interested in seeing. The editor replied within the hour. She was moving. She had never really stopped. She met the editor of the arts publication on a Tuesday afternoon in the last week of March, in their small office on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled of paper and good coffee, and the particular industry of people working on things they cared about. She brought the prints in a flat portfolio case, the 6 of them in tissue, and the editor laid them out on the long table in the meeting room, and looked at them in sequence, and then out of sequence, and then went back to the beginning, and looked at them in sequence again. He did not speak for several minutes. Nina stood at the other end of the table and let him look. She had learned not to fill silences like this one with commentary or explanation. The work either said what it needed to say or it did not, and you did not help it by talking over it. He looked up from the prints. He said, "These are the best work you have shown us." She said, "Thank you." He said, "They feel like someone who has been paying very close attention to something real." She thought about that phrase, paying very close attention to something real, and she thought it was more accurate than he knew. She had been paying close attention for the better part of a year to something that turned out to be real in ways she had not planned for, and the attention had gone somewhere, had been channeled into something, and the work was what it had become. She did not say any of this. She said, "I am glad they read that way." He said the publication would like to run all 6 as a full set, which was not something they had done often. Usually they ran single images or pairs, not complete series, and he asked if she had any preference about how they were presented. She said the sequence mattered to her and she could explain why, and he said please do, and she did. And he listened the way the best editors listened, which was with full attention and without needing to perform the attention by interrupting. By the end of the meeting they had a plan and a timeline and a fee that was better than she had expected, and she walked out of the building into the March afternoon feeling the clean, bright pleasure of a thing going well. Not the relief of a near thing averted, but the uncomplicated pleasure of something that simply was what it was. Good work, well received, moving forward. She walked home instead of taking the bus, which took 45 minutes and was longer than the sensible route, but took her along the river path, which she had always found clarifying in a way she could not entirely explain. There was something about the open water and the particular quality of light on it in this month, harder and more honest than the soft light of summer, that made thinking feel more possible. She walked the full 2 miles without stopping and thought about nothing in particular and everything in general, which was the state in which she usually understood things. She had a life that was working. She had work she was proud of and that was moving outward into the world in ways she could track. She had people who knew her and showed up for her and told her the truth when she needed it. She had a cat and an apartment and Thursday evenings at the pottery wheel where she was, by now, producing things that could be described as functional and occasionally as more than that. She had the illustration series going into print. She had the rebrand nearly done. She had herself, which was not a small thing, which was the most reliable thing she had. She had been in love with someone who had not been in love with her, and she had told the truth about it and received the truth back, and she had moved through the aftermath of that honestly and without performing either devastation or recovery, and she had come out the other side of it more herself than she had been going in. She was certain of this. She could feel the difference in the quality of her own company, which had become something she actively wanted rather than something she tolerated, between the times when she could be with other people or busy with work. She thought about the sentence often, less often than she had in November, less often than in December, but still sometimes, the way you thought sometimes about the pivotal moments of any period, turning them over to see what they showed you from different angles. He had said she deserved someone wonderful, and he had meant it as a gift, and it had been a gift in the way that honest things were gifts even when they were not comfortable, and she had received it, and she had lived with it, and she had made something from the living. She did not know if she agreed with the premise entirely. Not that she did not deserve someone wonderful. She did not have strong feelings about deserving in either direction. It was a framing that felt slightly beside the point. But the implication of the sentence, that the specific person was not the point, and that an abstract wonderful would do as well, did not match her experience of the matter. She had not wanted someone wonderful. She had wanted him, specifically, for reasons that were not transferable to any other person, and that she had not needed to justify at the time, and did not need to justify in retrospect. That had been real. She kept it as real, did not retroactively diminish it, did not talk herself into believing she had been confused or naive or too much invested in the wrong thing. She had invested exactly the right amount in a real feeling. The feeling had been hers, and had not been shared in the same measure. That was the sum of it. Nothing more and nothing less. She crossed the bridge at the midpoint of the river path and stopped for a moment, leaning on the railing, looking at the water moving below. The water was gray and patient, and entirely committed to its direction. She looked at it for a while. She did not think it had anything to teach her. She just liked the way it looked. The arts organization called her the following week. Claire was on the line, her voice carrying the particular energy that Nina had come to associate with her, which was the energy of someone who had a good idea and was not going to wait to say it. She said, the building's public hallways and common areas were going to be finished in April, and they had been thinking about what would go on the walls, and they had been thinking about Nina's illustration work, and would she consider a conversation about creating something specifically for those spaces. Nina said she would. She said she had been thinking about exactly this. She had not been thinking about exactly this. Not specifically, but she had been thinking in the direction of it. The way she sometimes found herself thinking toward things that had not yet announced themselves as ideas. Circling something from the outside, aware of a shape in the distance, not yet able to name it. They met the following Friday, Nina and Claire and the other two directors, in the space itself, walking through the hallways and corridors, and the large ground-floor lobby that had the particular brightness of a well-designed room in good light. Nina walked through slowly, looking at the walls and the way the light moved across them through the day, and the particular quality of each space, the size of it, the way people would move through it, the relationship between the person passing and the surface they were passing. She knew by the end of the walk what she wanted to make. Not a reproduction of the existing prints. Something new, something made specifically for these walls and these proportions and the particular quality of attention a person brought to a space like this, which was different from the attention they brought to a gallery. In a gallery you went to look. In a building you moved through, and the art caught you, stopped you for a moment without demanding to be stopped for, worked on you peripherally, and then occasionally fully. She said, I want to make something specifically for these walls. Not the prints from the series, but new work that knows where it lives. Claire looked at her with an expression that was lit with something. Yes, she said, that is what I was hoping you would say. She went home and started sketching that afternoon. The new ideas coming fast now, several at once, which meant she was in the right territory. The rule she had for herself in this state was not to pick too quickly, to make room for all of them, and see which ones had more to say after a few days. She filled 10 pages of her sketchbook before she stopped. The roughest possible sketches, just enough line to hold the idea, and then she made tea and sat back and looked at what she had. She was going to be busy for the next several months. She was glad of it. She was glad in the way she was always glad, when work arrived that was equal to her capacity, that asked her to be fully present and fully skilled, and fully committed to the problem, because this was the best use of herself she knew, and she had learned over this year that the best use of herself was also the best maintenance of herself, the practice that kept everything else working. She called Priya that evening, and told her about the commission. Priya made a sound on the phone that was pure joy on someone else's behalf, which was something Priya was exceptional at. This is what you have been working toward, Priya said. I have not been working toward this specifically. No, Priya said. But this is still what you have been working toward. The work is what happens when everything else is happening. And you have been working through a lot this year. Nina thought about this. She thought about the year, the 7 months of before, the restaurant, the 4 months of after, the work that had run through all of it like a continuous thread. She had been working through a lot. The work had not stopped while she moved through the rest. It had been the most reliable part of the whole thing. The place that kept receiving her fully, regardless of what else was true. Yes, she said. I suppose that is right. She finished the rebrand in the last week of March. She submitted the complete system to the client on a Thursday. The full package, the mark, the palette, the typography, the voice guidelines, the complete application system, all of it documented and organized and ready to be lived in. The client response that came back the following Monday was the most enthusiastic she had received in her professional career, which was not something she was easily surprised by. She read the email twice. She forwarded it to her art director with a single line, "We did good work." He wrote back, "You did extraordinary work. Receive that." She thought about receiving it. She was still learning to receive things fully, rather than partially, to let good things in all the way, rather than holding something back in reserve, some protective part of herself that did not quite trust good things to stay. She was learning that the reserve did not protect her. It only kept her from having the thing fully while it was there. She said, "Thank you," meaning it, letting it mean it. Owen sent her a message in April. He said, the Arts Center was finished, the one he had been designing for nearly 2 years, and the photograph showed the exterior in the morning light, the glass of the front face catching the light in a way that made the whole building look like it was breathing, like it was alive in the way that good buildings were alive, not with any supernatural quality, but with the presence of a thing made right. He sent it with only one word, finished. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The building was beautiful, unhurried and logical, and made with full attention to the way people would move through it and feel in it. She thought about the conversation they had had at his apartment, about ground-level public spaces and the generosity of design, and she could see that principle in the building, in the way the front engaged with the street, in the proportions of the entrance, in the clear transparency of the ground floor that made the interior visible from outside, so the building invited you in rather than turning away. She wrote back, "It is wonderful. You should be proud." He replied, "Thank you." She put her phone down and went back to the new sketches for the hallway project, which she had been working on for a week, and which were beginning to solidify into something she could commit to. She worked for 2 hours. When she stopped, she looked at what she had made and thought, "This is where I am. This is the work I am doing. This is the morning I am in." She had not wound up in the story she had hoped for. She had wound up here, in this apartment, in this work, in this life that was entirely hers and was very good, even when it was not the specific good she had been reaching toward in November. She was beginning to understand that those were different things, what you reached toward and what you had. They were not always the same, and when they were not the same, the thing you had was not automatically lesser. It was simply what was actually here, what was actually real, and the measure of a life was not how closely it matched the version you had wanted, but how fully you were in the version you were living. She was in hers fully. She had not been, for a while, but she was now. In the middle of April, she attended the small launch of the illustration series in the publication. 6 prints reproduced at full scale on the inside pages of the quarterly issue that had just come out. She was not at a launch in any official sense. There was no official anything. Only the issue arriving at the subscribers' doors and appearing in the small number of independent bookshops that stocked it, and a quiet notification from the editor that it was out. She bought a copy from the bookshop 2 streets from her apartment. She brought it home, and sat on the couch with butter in her lap, and opened it to the page where her work lived and looked at it. The reproduction was good, better than she had expected. The color held, the line quality held, the sequence worked in the way she had designed it to work, each image speaking to the next, and the whole of them saying the thing she had been trying to say, which was about presence, about being entirely where you were, about the specific and irreplaceable quality of a person fully in their own life. She sat with it for a while. She thought about the year, the full measure of it, From the March evening when she had sat across from someone at a long table and felt the particular quality of being paid attention to, all the way to here, this April afternoon, her work in print, her hands empty of everything except the magazine, butter heavy and warm and indifferent in her lap. She had loved someone. The love had been real. It had not been returned in the same way, and she had learned to hold that, and had not collapsed under the holding, and had kept working, and had made things she was proud of, and had stayed in her life with full attention, even when the full attention was difficult. She was not the same person who had sat at that table in March. She was more specifically herself, which was not the same as more guarded, or more defended, or more careful in the diminishing sense. She was more clear, more certain of her own edges, more able to be in a room with someone and feel that particular, dangerous recognition, and not mistake it for a promise, and not run from it either. She did not know what was coming. She had stopped spending energy trying to know. There was a future she could not see, and things in it she could not predict, and she was going to meet all of it with the specific and particular attention she had been refining all year, the attention that was the best of what she had. She closed the magazine. She looked at the yellow wall across from the window, the darker yellow she had painted in January, the color she had chosen without apology. The light hit it at an angle that turned it almost gold. She had made that choice. She had made a lot of choices this year, some of them brave and some of them simply necessary, and all of them hers. She put the magazine on the side table. She picked up her sketchbook. She opened it to a fresh page. She had work to do. She had the hallway project beginning to take real shape. She had the next thing after that, whatever it would turn out to be. She had her people and her apartment and her cat and her Thursday evenings at the wheel where she was, by now, capable of making cups that held water and had a character. She had herself. She had become, over the course of this year and all its particular difficulty and particular richness, a person she was glad to be. She began to draw. The line went onto the page and became the beginning of something she did not yet know the end of, which was how it always started, which was the best way it started. She followed the line where it went. She paid close attention. She was entirely here. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.